friends, welcome to Sanket Group of Coaching. I am Sanket Purohit. Today we are going to see chapter number 6, Weathering the Storm in Ersama from your Moments book. So let us begin with our lesson and I will explain you in detail each and every paragraph, bachcho. So reading out the first paragraph, on 27th October 1999, 7 years after his mother's death, Prashant had gone to the block headquarters of Ersama, a small town in coastal Orissa, some 18 kilometers from his village, to spend the day with a friend. In the evening, a dark, menacing storm quickly gathered. Winds beat against the houses with a speed and fury that Prashant had never witnessed before. Heavy and incessant rain filled the darkness. Ancient trees were uprooted and crashed to the earth. Screams rent the air as people and houses were swiftly washed away. The angry waters swirled into his friend's house neck deep. The building was of brick and mortar and was so strong enough to survive the devastation of the wind's velocity of 350 kilometers per hour. But the cold terror of family grew with the crashing of trees that had got uprooted and fallen on their house, sometime in the middle of night, damaging its roofs and walls. Now, सबसे पहले some important words. Menacing का मतलब होता है dangerous and harmful. Fury is extreme strength. Incessant means unceasing, or you can say continuous. Ancient, old. Rent, filled. Swirled, move or flowed along with a whirling motion. And the last word, mortar, a mixture of lime, cement, sand and water used to construct a building. Now let us begin with the explanation. Prashant was a native of village in the coastal state of Odisha. On 27th October 1999, he was on a visit to friend in Ersama, which is a small town in Odisha and a block headquarter in Jagatpura district. His village was at a distance of 18 kilometers from Ersama. He had lost his mother 7 years ago. That day, a strong storm gathered in the evening. Furious wind accompanied by continuous rain lashed the place. Screams could be heard as trees got uprooted and destroyed the house as they fell on them. The water flowed with gush and swept away houses that came in the way. There was a neck-deep water in his friend's house. As his house was a pakka house, it was able to resist the strong winds which blew at a speed of 350 kilometers per hour. His friend's family was terrorized because in the middle of the night, trees had fallen on the house, damaging the roof and walls of the building. Okay, so that was the explanation of first paragraph. Moving ahead, I will read out this paragraph for you. First of all, the crazed destruction wrought by a cyclone and surge of ocean continued for the next 36 hours, although wind speed had reduced somewhat by next morning. To escape the water rising in the house, Prashant and his friend's family had taken refuge on the roof. Prashant will never forget the shock he experienced at his first glimpse of devastation wrought by the super cyclone in grey light of the early morning. Now, first of all, what do you mean by word surge? Surge is nothing but gush. Refuge is nothing but your shelter. And rot means produce as a result of something. So now I will explain you. The storm continued for the next 1.5 days. Sorry, just a moment. So I was explaining that the storm continued for next 1.5 days. That is almost 36 hours. Although the wind had slowed down. To escape the rising levels of water, Prashant along with his friend and his family took shelter on the roof of the house. As the day dawned, Prashant saw the destruction caused by the super cyclone. Moving ahead, a raging, deadly brown sheet of water covered everything as far as the eye could see. Only fractured cement house still showed in a few places. Bloated animal carcasses and human corpse floated in every direction. All round, even huge old trees had fallen. Two coconut trees had fallen on the roof of their house. This was blessing in disguise because the tender coconuts from the trees kept the trapped family from starving in several days that followed. So थोड़े थोड़े अब meanings बता देता हूँ. What do you mean by word fractured? तो fractured is nothing but broken. Bloated का मतलब होता है swollen. Animal carcasses, that is the dead bodies of animals. Blessing in disguise, ये word मैंने आप लोगों को आगे भी use किया है. तो that is nothing but an apparent misfortune that eventually has a good results. And tender means nothing but soft, raw. ठीक है. सो अब एक्सप्लेनेशन बता देता हूँ. As far as Prashant could see, he saw a cover of muddy brown water. There was the remains of shattered houses surrounded by the water. Dead bodies of animals and human beings floated in the water. Huge trees had fallen and were floating around. Two coconut trees had fallen on the roof of their house. Initially, they thought the trees had damaged the roof and walls of the house, but later they realized that this proved to be a beneficial for them. As they were trapped in the house, they ate the raw coconuts from these trees and saved themselves from dying due to starvation. So, next paragraph. For the next 2 days, Prashant sat huddled with his friend's family in open on the rooftop. They froze in the cold and incessant rain. The rainwater washed away Prashant's tears. The only thought that flashed through his mind was whether his family had survived the fury of the super cyclone. Was he to be beveled once again? Now huddled का मतलब होता है together in a group. Then flashed through his mind means come to his mind. And beveled, ये जो last word है उसका मतलब है to have a lost family member or a friend to death. So what does this paragraph wants to explain us? They spent the next 2 days on the rooftop. Everyone was so scared that they sat together in a group. It was very cold and continuous rain washed away Prashant's tears. He was worried about his family members. Maybe he could have lost another family member and would be in grief over the loss of the loved one once again. This thought worried Prashant. Next, this paragraph. 2 days later, which seemed to be Prashant like 2 years, the rain ceased and the rainwater slowly began to recede. Prashant was determined to seek out his family without further delay, but the situation was still dangerous, and his friend's family pleaded with Prashant to stay back a little while longer. But Prashant knew he had to go. Now, recede का मतलब होता है reduce. यहाँ पे word है ceased का मतलब होता है stop. So the rain stopped after 2 days. It seemed to Prashant that 2 days time was as long as the duration of 2 years. This shows that it was very difficult for him to pass the time, as the worry about his family's well-being worried him. The rain had stopped and the water was receding gradually. Although it was dangerous to go out, he did not waste any more time and left to find his family. His friend's family requested Prashant to stay back, but he left. Next paragraph. He equipped himself with a long sturdy stick and then started on his 18-kilometer expedition back to his village through the swollen flooded waters. It was a journey he would never forget. He constantly had to use his stick to locate the road to determine where the water was most shallow. At places it was waist deep and progress was slow. At several points he lost the road and had to swim. After some distance he was relieved to find two friends of his uncle who were also returning to their village. They decided to move together. Okay, so expedition is nothing but journey. तो ये पूरे पैराग्राफ में ऐसा कहना चाहते हैं कि with the help of long stick, Prashant started the 18-kilometer long journey back home. As he passed through the floodwater, the journey got inscribed in his mind forever. He had to use stick to guide him and find the path where the water was shallower. Shallower मतलब क्या होगा जहाँ पे पानी कम होगा वहां पे ठीक है. At some places the water was waist deep and his pace slowed down. At some places he lost track of the road and he had to swim to save himself from drowning. After some time he was relieved as he got company of two friends who, along with their uncle, were returning to their village. All of them proceed together. Moving ahead, as they waded through the waters, the scenes they witnessed grew more and more macabre. They had to push away many human bodies, men, women, children, and carcasses of dogs, goats, and cattle that the current swept against them as they moved ahead. In every village that they passed, they could barely see a house standing. Prashant now wept out loud and long. He was sure that his family could not have survived this catastrophe. Now what do you mean by waded? Waded का मतलब होता है swam. Macabre. Macabre का मतलब होता है horrible. And the last word catastrophe, that is nothing but your disaster. So ये पैराग्राफ में ऐसा लिखा है कि as the group proceeded they got to see horrible scenes. They had to push dead bodies of human beings, animals which were being swept around with the current of water. As they crossed the villages, not even a single house was seen. As Prashant's fear grew, he wept loudly. जोर से चिल्ला चिल्ला के रोने लगा था. He was sure that his family members would not have survived the disaster. Next, eventually Prashant reached his village Kalikuda. His heart went cold. Where their home once stood, there were only remnants of its roof. Some of their belongings were caught, mangled, and twisted in the branches of trees just visible above the dark waters. Young Prasant decided to the Red Cross shelter to look for his family. Now, what do you mean by remnants? Remnants is nothing but small remaining quantities. So, when Prasant reached his village Kaliguda, he became numb on seeing the remainings of the house. Their belongings were scattered in the water, and something hung on the branches of the tree just above the flood water. He decided to look for his family at the shelter set up by the Road Red Cross Society. Now next paragraph. Among the first people he saw in the crowd was his maternal grandmother, that is Nani. Weak with hunger, she rushed to him, her hands outstretched, her eyes brimming. It was a miracle they had long given him up for a dead. So, at Red Cross shelter, eyes brimming means eyes were full of tears. So at the Red Cross shelter, he saw his maternal grandmother. She appeared weak, but was glad to see Prashant was alive. She rushed to him with her arms open and her eyes full of tears. It was a miracle for her as the family had thought that Prashant would not have survived the storm. Okay? Next, quickly word spread and his extended family gathered around him and hugged him tight in relief. Prashant anxiously scanned the motley, battered group. His brother and sister, his uncles and aunts, they all seemed to be there. Now, what do you mean by motley? Motley is nothing but desperate, varied in appearance characters, and battered. Battered का मतलब होता है injured. So, as Prashant's extended family came to know that he had come, they gathered him around and hugged him in relief. Prashant saw that everyone was worried and injured. He met his siblings, uncles, and aunts. Next paragraph. By the next morning, as he took into the desperate situation in the shelter, he decided to get a grip over himself. He sensed a deathly grief settling upon the 2,500 strong crowd in the shelter. 86 lives were lost in the village. All the 96 houses had been washed away. It was their fourth day at the shelter. So far they had survived on green coconuts, but there were too few to go around such a tumult of people. Tumult means uproar of disorderly crowd force. तो क्या हुआ? Next morning, Prashant realized that he had to get over his emotions and take charge of the situation. The huge crowd of around 2,500 people in the shelter was full of sadness as they had lost everything in the storm. 86 people had been killed by the super cyclone and they had been at the shelter for last 4 days. They had been eating raw coconuts, but now this were insufficient for the large number of people. Okay, next paragraph, बच्चों. Prashant, all of 19 years, decided to step in as a leader of his village. If no one else did, he organized a group of youths and elders to jointly pressurize the merchant once again to part with his rice. This time, the delegation succeeded and returned triumphantly. Triumphantly means winningly, wading through the receding waters with food for the entire shelter. No one cared that rice was already rotting. Branches from fallen trees were gathered to light a reluctant and slow fire on which to cook the rice. For the first time in 4 days, the survivors at the cyclone shelter were able to feel their bellies. Bellies means stomach. Here, his next task was to organize a team of youth volunteers to clean the shelter of filth, urine, vomit, and floating carcasses, and to tend the wounded and fractures of many who had been injured. So triumphantly जैसे मैंने बताया वो victorious होता है और bellies का भी मैंने बता दिया जिसका मतलब होता है stomach. Now understand this entire paragraph. तो क्या हुआ? Prashant, who was very young at the age of 19, decided to lead the crowd of distraught villagers. He formed a group of villagers including the elders and youth. They planned to force the local merchant to give them the stock of grains and rice to feed the people. The group succeeded and swam through the flood to get food for the crowd. No one was bothered by the fact that rice was getting rotten because they were starved and were ready to eat even the rotting rice. The branches of broken trees were used to kindle a fire. As they were wet, burning a fire was arduous task. It was a slow fire, but they managed to cook the rice on it. The survivors ate the meal after 4 days. The second task of group was to clean the shelter. They removed the garbage, cleaned excretory waste, dead bodies, and tended the injuries. Next paragraph. On the fifth day, a military helicopter flew the shelter and dropped some food parcels. It then did not return. The youth task force gathered empty utensils from the shelter. Then they deputed the children to lie in the sand left by the waters around the shelter with these utensils on their stomach to communicate to the passing helicopters that they were hungry. The message got through, and after that, the helicopter made regular rounds out of the shelter, airdropping food and other basic needs. Okay, now, क्या हुआ? So by on fifth day after the super cyclone, a military helicopter flew over the shelter and dropped food parcels. It did not return later, but they needed food. So the youth in the crowded gathered empty utensils. The children were made to lie in the sand with utensils on their stomach to indicate the passing of helicopters that they needed food. The helicopters got the message and returned with the food and other necessities for the crowd at the shelter. Next, next paragraph. Prashant found that a large number of children had been orphaned. Orphaned का मतलब होता है अनाथ होना. He brought them together and put up polythene sheet shelter for them. Women were mobilized to look after them, while the men secured food and materials for the shelters. The orphaned English meaning अगर होता है तो a child who lost either one or both of his parents to death. So what did Prashant observe? A large number of children had been orphaned in the super cyclone. Prashant put them together under a polythene sheet. The women in the shelter were deployed to look after the children, and the men arranged food for everyone. Next, As the week passed, Prashant was quick to recognize that women and children were sinking deeper and deeper in their grief. He persuaded the woman to start working in the Food for Work program started by NGO, and for children, he organized sports events. He himself loved to play cricket, and so he organized cricket matches for children. Prashant engaged with other volunteers in helping the widows and children to pick up the broken pieces of their lives. The initial government plan was to set up institutions for orphans and widows. However, this step was successfully resisted as it was felt in such institutions children would grow up without love and widows would suffer from stigma and loneliness. Prashant Group believed orphans should be resettled in their own community itself, possibly in new foster families made up of childless widows and children without adult care. Now, स्टिग्मा का मतलब होता है disgrace. फोस्टर फैमिली का मतलब होता है family that provides custody or guardianship for a children whose parents are dead or unable to look after them. ये पूरा जो पैराग्राफ में पढ़ के गया उसका मतलब क्या है कि the sadness of the children women in the shelter was growing with each passing day. So Prashant requested to work in NGO called Food for Work. In order to keep the children busy, he organized sport events for them. He took help of other volunteers to help the widows and orphans to return to the normal lives. The government had proposed to set up separate institutions for widows and orphans, but this proposal was successfully rejected by Prashant. He felt that these separate institutions would neither help the orphan children nor would they be beneficial for the widows. These volunteers wanted to settle the orphan children and widows in foster families where they would get love and security in their own community. The last paragraph, it is 6 months after the devastation of super cyclone. This time Prashant's wounded spirit has healed simply because he had no time to bother about his own pain. His handsome, youthful face is what the widows and orphan children of his village seek out most in their darkest hour of grief. So, क्या हुआ? After 6 months of the disaster, Prashant has come out of the grief of losing his mother because he was engrossed in helping others that he forgot his own pain. All the widows and orphans looked up to him in their time of grief, and so he learned to come out of his gloom and smile. And this entire chapter was written by Harsh Mander. Okay, so that's the end of our chapter number 6, weathering storm of weathering storm in Ersama. If you have gone through this entire video, please like, share, subscribe, and do comment. Okay, in comment section. Thank you very much, bacho. Bye bye.